At my daughter's wedding, her groom bent close and murmured something in her ear. Suddenly, she spun toward me and struck my face. The blow echoed through the room. Yet instead of weeping, I gave a soft chuckle and said, "Now I understand." Her cheeks drained, her grin vanished. She couldn't have expected what I spoke next. Can you imagine pouring every last drop of your soul into the people you love, only to realize they'd happily watch you drown without throwing a single rope? That gut-wrenching realization hit me like a physical blow the moment my own daughter's hand connected with my cheek. Right there, in front of 200 stunned wedding guests. I was 53 years old, and I thought I knew what true betrayal looked like. I was so wrong. What you're about to hear will make you understand why some bridges aren't just burned, they're utterly obliterated. And why, sometimes, the only real mercy you can offer is letting people face the brutal consequences of their own choices. It was Rebecca's wedding day. I stood in my Westchester house, empty now, just boxes stacked against the walls. Only 3 months earlier, I'd put it on the market. Not because I wanted to, God no. This was the house. The house where I'd raised my babies, where I'd marked their height on the kitchen doorframe, where I'd nursed them through fevers and cheered their first steps. I was selling it because I had to. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca, my youngest, was marrying into serious money while I was liquidating everything, just to stay afloat. My other 2 sons, Jacob and Jonathan, had made their positions painfully clear months ago. I desperately asked for help with the mountain of medical bills from their father's cancer treatment. "You need to downsize anyway, Mom," Jacob had said, barely even glancing up from his phone. "This place is too big for just you." Jonathan, ever the financial advisor to everyone but his own mother, had been even blunter. "We can't enable your poor financial planning. Dad's been gone 2 years. You should have figured this out by now." Poor financial planning? As if spending every single penny we had on experimental treatments to keep their father, alive was some kind of character flaw. My blood ran cold just thinking about it. I adjusted the navy dress I'd chosen for the wedding. Conservative. Appropriate. Forgettable. Rebecca hadn't asked for my input on a single thing. I'd found out about the venue from her Instagram, the date from a save-the-date card that arrived weeks after her closest friends had already RSVP'd. The message was loud and clear. I was an obligation, not a participant. Just a mother. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours, battling October traffic. Fall weddings were trendy now, Rebecca had informed me during one of our brief, perfunctory phone calls. Everything about this wedding was trendy. The organic flower arrangements, the farm-to-table catering, the Edison bulb lighting strung between ancient oak trees. It was beautiful, I had to admit, even as I mentally calculated the cost. $60,000 minimum, maybe 70. I parked my 10-year-old Honda between a gleaming Tesla and a BMW, suddenly feeling intensely conscious of my age. Inside the reception venue, I found my assigned spot, table number 12, in the back with Rebecca's college roommates and their husbands. Not with family. Apparently, family was seated at tables 1 through 4. And I wasn't family anymore. "You must be Rebecca's mom," chirped a blonde woman in her 30s, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Ashley from her yoga teacher training. She talks about you all the time." She didn't, but I smiled anyway. "How lovely to meet you." The lie tasted like ash. The ceremony itself was flawless. Rebecca looked absolutely radiant in her $1,000 dress, gliding down the aisle to a string quartet that probably cost more than my future monthly rent. Blake, her groom, came from pharmaceutical money. His family owned a chain of specialty clinics across New England. He was handsome in that generically privileged way Rebecca had always been drawn to. I watched my daughter promise to love and honor this man and felt nothing. No pride, no joy, not even sadness. Just emptiness, like staring at a photograph of someone you used to know, long, long ago. During the cocktail hour, I made polite conversation with strangers, a hollow smile pasted on my face while my sons held court near the bar. Jacob was in tech now, something involving cryptocurrency that he couldn't quite explain, but swore was revolutionary. Jonathan had his financial consulting firm, though most of his clients seemed to be friends of friends looking for tax loopholes. They regaled Blake's groomsmen with stories of their latest business ventures. Neither of them approached me. Neither asked how I was doing, or where I was living now that the house had sold, or if I needed anything. I was a ghost at my own daughter's wedding. Rebecca finally found me during dinner, appearing at my shoulder like a vision in white. "Mom, you look nice," she said, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I told her. "The whole day is beautiful." "Thanks." Blake's parents really went all out. She paused, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might sit down. Might actually have a real conversation with me. Instead, she glanced at her watch. A Cartier, I noticed. Probably an engagement gift. I should get back to the head table. We're doing toast soon. I watched her glide away, her dress trailing behind her like seafoam. When had she become so polished, so untouchable? And when had I become someone she needed to escape from? The toasts began after the main course. Blake's father spoke first, welcoming Rebecca into their family with a warmth I hadn't felt from my own children in years. Blake's best man told some embarrassing college stories that made everyone laugh. Then it was time for family. Jacob went first. His speech was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while sounding profound. He talked about watching Rebecca grow into a force of nature, about how proud he was of her authenticity and courage. He never mentioned me, not once. Even though I was the one who'd driven her to every dance class, sat through every recital, helped her through her eating disorder in high school when her brothers were too busy with their own lives to even notice she was disappearing. Jonathan's speech was shorter, more focused on Blake and how lucky Rebecca was to have found someone who could provide for her the way she deserves. Again, no mention of the woman who'd provided for her for 28 years, often at my own expense. Then Rebecca stood up, champagne flute in hand, her cheeks flushed with excitement and alcohol. This was her moment, her chance to thank the people who'd made this day possible. I found myself leaning forward, waiting. That's when Blake leaned over and whispered something in her ear. I saw her face change, saw something hard and calculating flash in her eyes. She looked directly at me across the room, and I knew, with the certainty only a mother can have, that whatever was coming next would change everything. She raised her glass higher. "Before I thank everyone, there's something I need to address." The room fell silent. 200 guests turned their attention to my daughter, my baby, who was looking at me like I was a stranger who'd crashed her party. "Some of you might be wondering why my father isn't here to walk me down the aisle today." Her voice carried perfectly in the hushed room. "He died 2 years ago. And my mother," she paused, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. "My mother spent every penny he left us on treatments that everyone knew wouldn't work. She was selfish and desperate. And now she expects us to clean up her mess." I felt the blood drain from my face. Around me, people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to look at Rebecca or at me. "I wanted to make it clear," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "that this wedding, this day, this life I'm building with Blake, none of it has anything to do with her. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them." That's when she raised her glass in my direction, a toast that felt more like a curse. And that's when she walked over to me, leaned down, and slapped me across the face, hard enough to make my ears ring. The silence was deafening. 200 people watching, waiting to see what I would do. Would I cry? Would I beg? Would I make a scene that would give them something to gossip about for months? Instead, I laughed. A quiet, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise everyone, including myself. "Now I know," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stillness. I stood up, walked to the microphone Rebecca had abandoned, and smiled at the crowd of shocked faces staring back at me. My hands were steady as I held the mic, looking out at 200 people frozen in shock. Rebecca stood behind me, her wedding dress suddenly looking less like a dream and more like a cheap costume. Her face was drained of color. My sons, Jacob and Jonathan, were pushed back from their chairs at the head table. Jacob's mouth was hanging open, and Jonathan's eyes darted toward the exits like he was calculating escape routes. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter's wedding," I began, my voice calm and clear. Since Rebecca has chosen to make this about family finances, I think it's only fair that everyone understands the full picture. I saw Blake's parents exchange alarmed glances. His mother's hand moved protectively to her pearl necklace. Pharmaceutical money, I supposed, didn't like messy family drama. My daughter is 3 months pregnant, I announced, watching Rebecca's face crumble. Congratulations are in order, though I suspect Blake's family might be interested to know that the timing doesn't quite match up with your engagement story. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Blake had gone completely white, his eyes locked on Rebecca, who was shaking her head frantically, mouthing no over and over again. But that's not why I'm really here at this microphone, I continued, warming to my theme. I'm here because my children seem to think I'm a foolish old woman who's squandered their inheritance on hopeless medical treatments. I paused for effect. What they don't know is that I've spent the last 6 months with a very thorough forensic accountant. Jonathan was standing now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Mom, stop. Please. I ignored him. You see, when you're facing financial ruin, you tend to look very carefully at where your money went. And while I did spend our savings trying to save their father's life, a choice I'd make again without hesitation, I discovered some interesting discrepancies in our family trust. Jacob had his phone out, probably texting frantically, but there was nowhere to run from this. 3 years ago, when my husband was diagnosed, someone accessed our joint accounts and transferred significant funds to various shell companies. Companies that happened to be registered to my eldest son, Jonathan's, business address. I let that sink in. My financial advisor son, who told me I needed to learn to live within my means, had already helped himself to nearly $200,000 of those very means. The silence was broken by whispered conversations starting up around the room. I could see phones being discreetly lifted, recording this moment for posterity. Rebecca's perfectly curated wedding was about to go viral for all the wrong reasons. And Jacob, I turned my attention to my middle child, who was gripping his champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Your revolutionary cryptocurrency venture. The one you couldn't quite explain. I smiled. I can explain it. It's called embezzlement. When you use your mother's credit cards to purchase digital assets that only exist in accounts she doesn't have access to. Jacob stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. You don't know what you're talking about. $73,000, Jacob. That's what I know I'm talking about. That's what you stole from the woman who gave you life while she was watching her husband die. The room was buzzing now, a hive of shocked murmurs and turning heads. Blake's father was leaning heavily on the table, looking like he might be sick. This wasn't the kind of family his son was supposed to be marrying into. But Rebecca, I said, turning to my daughter, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her $1,000 dress. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. Mom, please don't. You were the most creative of all. My daughter, the lifestyle influencer with 30,000 followers, had been very busy building her brand. What her followers don't know is that every single sponsored post, every product placement, every authentic recommendation had been paid for with money transferred from her dying father's medical fund. I held up my phone, showing screenshots of bank transfers. $47,000 in cosmetic procedures, $12,000 on a Chanel handbag for an unboxing video, $6,000 on a weekend in Napa that she posted about under the hashtag blessed. All of it taken from the account we'd set up for experimental treatments that might have given your father another year. Rebecca was sobbing now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation, of exposure, of consequences finally catching up. She looked at Blake desperately, but he was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. The best part, I continued, my voice never wavering, is that none of them thought I'd figure it out. They thought I was just a grieving widow, too devastated and too stupid to notice that my children were picking my bones clean while I was distracted by dying husbands and funeral arrangements. I set the microphone back in its stand and looked at my 3 children. These strangers who'd grown from the babies I'd nursed, the toddlers I'd chased, the teenagers I'd worried about. So, yes, Rebecca, you're absolutely right. This wedding, this life you're building, has nothing to do with me. Because I'm done. I'm done being your bank, your safety net, Your reliable source of unconditional love that you can exploit without consequence. The silence stretched out like a held breath. Rebecca had sunk into a chair, her perfect wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. Jacob was standing frozen, his face cycling through expressions of rage and panic. Jonathan had his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his lawyer. Blake's father cleared his throat and stood up, his voice cutting through the tension. I think perhaps the celebration should come to an end. The exodus began immediately. Guests grabbed purses and jackets, whispering urgently to each other as they headed for the exits. I watched Blake lean down to Rebecca, his voice too low for me to hear, but his body language said everything. He looked disgusted, betrayed, like someone who'd just realized he'd been sold a counterfeit. As the room emptied, my 3 children finally approached me. Not together. They'd learned to hunt in a pack, but now they were scattered, defensive, alone. Jonathan reached me first. You've destroyed everything, he hissed. Rebecca's marriage, our family. I didn't destroy anything, I said calmly. I simply revealed what was already broken. Jacob grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You can't prove any of this. You're a bitter old woman making up stories. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. Take your hand off me, Jacob. Now. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he released me immediately. Rebecca approached last, her wedding dress dragging on the floor, her carefully applied makeup now streaked. Mom, she whispered, how could you do this to me, today of all days? The same way you could steal from me while your father was dying, I replied. The way you could slap me in front of 200 people. The same way you could stand up at your wedding and call me selfish for trying to save the man who gave you life. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. I raised you better than this, I said quietly. All of you. I taught you to be kind, to be grateful, to take care of the people who love you. Instead, you became predators. Blake appeared at Rebecca's side, his face hard. Rebecca, we need to talk. Now. As they walked away, I heard him say, 3 months pregnant? When exactly were you going to tell me? I was alone in the empty reception hall, surrounded by abandoned champagne glasses and wilted flowers. The Edison bulbs still twinkled overhead, but the magic was gone, replaced by something harder and cleaner. I pulled out my phone and called Oscar. It's done, I said when he answered. I'm coming home. Oscar's farm sat on 47 acres in upstate Vermont, far enough from civilization that cell service was spotty, and the only sounds at night were owls and the occasional coyote. When I pulled into his gravel driveway at nearly midnight, he was waiting on the porch with a mug of coffee and a blanket, like he'd known exactly when I'd arrive. How did it go? He asked as I climbed the porch steps, my navy dress wrinkled, my feet aching from the long drive. Better than expected, I said, accepting the coffee and settling into the wooden chair beside his. Worse than they deserved. Oscar had known me for 30 years, ever since veterinary school. Back then, we were both young and idealistic, convinced we could save every animal that came through our doors. He'd been in love with me then, though I'd been too caught up in meeting and marrying Charlie to even notice. When I chose marriage and children over my career, Oscar had chosen animals and solitude. He'd never married, never had children, just built a thriving practice treating livestock and rescue animals in a town where everybody knew his name, but nobody truly knew his heart. The guest room's ready, he said quietly. You know you're welcome to stay as long as you need. I'd been staying in his guest room for 3 weeks now, ever since the house sale had finalized, and I'd needed somewhere to land while I figured out what came next. Oscar had offered without hesitation, the way he'd offered everything else over the years, help with the kids when Charlie was traveling, a shoulder to cry on during the worst of Charlie's illness, practical advice when the bills started piling up. He'd been the constant I'd never fully appreciated until I'd lost everything else. Any word from them? He asked. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through 17 missed calls from Jacob, 23 from Jonathan, and 41 from Rebecca. The voicemails had progressed from angry to desperate to threatening, and back to desperate again. I'd listened to a few. Jacob calling me a vindictive bitch. Jonathan threatening to sue me for defamation. Rebecca sobbing about how I'd ruined her life. Then I'd stopped listening. They want to talk, I said. They want to explain. To apologize. To work things out. Do you want to hear what they have to say? I considered this, watching the stars whirl overhead in a sky unmarked by city lights. A month ago, I might have said yes. A month ago, I still believed that families could heal, that love could overcome anything, that my children's anger came from grief and would eventually soften into understanding. No, I said, and felt something settle into place inside my chest. I don't. Oscar nodded, unsurprised. He'd seen the bank statements I'd shown the forensic accountant, had listened to me work through the timeline of betrayals while we'd walked his property lines. He understood better than anyone how calculated it had been. How they'd waited until I was at my most vulnerable to take what they wanted. Blake called off the wedding, I told him. Rebecca's been posting about it on Instagram. Emotional breakdowns, cryptic quotes about betrayal, asking for prayers and support. She's hemorrhaging followers. And the others. Jonathan's business is struggling. Word gets around in financial circles. Apparently, Jacob had to move back in with his ex-girlfriend because he couldn't make rent. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. Consequences. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. This was something I'd forgotten existed. Peace. Quiet. The luxury of not having to perform or pretend or manage other people's emotions. For 30 years, I'd been a wife, a mother, a caretaker, always thinking about someone else's needs. Here, with Oscar, I could just be. I have a proposition, he said eventually. I turned to look at him. Even in the porch light, I could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the way time had changed us both from the young people we'd been in veterinary school. But his eyes were the same. Kind. Steady. Patient. The county's been after me to find a partner, he continued. Someone to help with the large animal calls, maybe take over some of the routine work. I'm getting too old to be wrestling bulls at 3 in the morning. I laughed, despite myself. You're 55, Oscar. Hardly ancient. Old enough to know what I want, he said quietly. And what I want is for you to stay. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm helping out of pity. As my partner in the practice, and if you're willing, everything else. I stared at him, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Oscar, I know, he said quickly. I know you're not ready. Maybe you won't ever be ready. I know you're still processing everything with Charlie, everything with the kids. I'm not asking for an answer tonight or even this month. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe this is where you're supposed to be. He was right about my not being ready. Charlie had been dead for 2 years, but I was still wearing my wedding ring. Still sometimes reached for his side of the bed in my sleep. Still caught myself buying his favorite cereal at the grocery store. Grief was strange that way. It lingered in muscle memory, in habits you didn't realize you'd formed. But Oscar was also right about something else. Sitting here on his porch, looking out over land that stretched to the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but potential. The possibility that my life wasn't over, that I wasn't just counting down days until death. Tell me about the practice, I said. His face lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. Mostly large animals, dairy farms, horse ranches, some sheep. Emergency calls, routine wellness checks, the occasional exotic rescue. Remember Sarah Mitchell from our class? She's got a wildlife rehabilitation center about an hour south. Sends us overflow cases. I did remember Sarah. Brilliant, intense, devoted to wildlife medicine in a way that had made the rest of us feel lazy by comparison. The idea of working with her again, of using the degree I'd earned but never practiced, sent a spark of excitement through me. I'd need to get licensed in Vermont, I said. Probably do some continuing education to catch up on what's changed. Already looked into it, he said with a grin. There's a reciprocity agreement with New York, and the state board offers refresher courses for people returning to practice. We could start slow. You could observe for a few weeks, get your feet wet again. The practicality of it was appealing. But there was something else too. For the first time in years, someone was offering me something without expecting anything in return. Oscar wasn't asking me to fund his dreams or fix his problems or sacrifice my well-being for his comfort. He was offering partnership, collaboration, shared purpose. My phone buzzed with another call from Rebecca. I glanced at the screen, then deliberately declined it. "They're not going to give up," Oscar said. "I know." I set down my coffee and looked at him. "Seriously, are you sure you want to get involved in this mess?" "Because it is a mess, Oscar. My children hate me now. They're going to make things difficult." "Let them try," he said. And there was a steel in his voice I'd never heard before. "You protected them for 30 years. Made excuses for them. Enabled their worst impulses because you loved them. Look where it got you. Maybe it's time someone protected you for a change." The words hit me harder than I expected. When was the last time someone had wanted to protect me? When was the last time someone had seen me as worth protecting? "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Of course." He stood up, stretching. "But while you're thinking, maybe come out with me tomorrow morning. Mrs. Patterson's mare is due to foal, and I could use an extra pair of hands." I smiled, remembering the rush of delivering my first calf in veterinary school. The miracle of new life entering the world under my care. "I'd like that." As we headed inside, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Jonathan. "Mom, we need to talk. What you did tonight was unforgivable, but we're family. We can work this out." I deleted the message without responding and turned off my phone. Family was supposed to be about love, loyalty, protection. What I'd had with my children was something else entirely. A transaction disguised as love, obligation masquerading as affection. But maybe family could be something different. Maybe it could be chosen, built on respect and mutual care instead of blood and guilt. Maybe it could be what Oscar was offering. Partnership. Protection. The chance to build something new from the ashes of what I'd lost. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without crying. 6 months. That's how long it took for my old life to completely unravel and for something new to take its place. I was kneeling in Oscar's barn, my hands inside a laboring mare, feeling for the foal's position, when my phone started buzzing with a call that would test every boundary I'd built. "Easy, girl," I murmured to the horse, whose name was Duchess and who belonged to Tom Patterson, a dairy farmer with hands like tree trunks and a voice gentler than a lullaby. "We're almost there." Oscar stood beside me, monitoring Duchess's vital signs, ready to assist if needed. We'd fallen into this rhythm over the months, a partnership so natural it felt like we'd been working together for years instead of just starting fresh. My veterinary skills had returned faster than I'd expected. Muscle memory and instinct taking over despite the decades away from practice. The phone kept buzzing. I ignored it. "Foal in the right position," I said, feeling the tiny hooves through the birth canal. "Front feet, head down. This should be straightforward." Oscar smiled, and I caught the pride in his expression. He'd been so patient these past months, never pushing, never demanding answers about the future or my feelings. He simply existed alongside me, solid and dependable, like a lighthouse marking safe harbor. The foal slipped into the world in a rush of fluid and effort, and I guided the tiny creature onto the straw, clearing its airways while Duchess began the ancient ritual of cleaning and bonding with her baby. It never got old, this moment of birth, of watching new life take its first breath. "Beautiful work, Doc," Tom said, using the title that still felt foreign and familiar at the same time. In the 6 months since I'd started practicing with Oscar, word had spread through the farming community. The new vet, Oscar's partner. They called me that with raised eyebrows and knowing looks that we pretended not to notice. My phone buzzed again. This time, Oscar picked it up and glanced at the screen. His expression darkened. "It's Rebecca," he said quietly. "She's been calling all morning." I wiped my hands on a towel, considering. Rebecca had tried various approaches over the months. Angry voicemails, tearful pleas, attempts at manipulation through mutual friends. I'd ignored them all. Jacob and Jonathan had been similarly persistent, cycling through rage, bargaining, and desperation with clockwork regularity. "Answer it," I said finally. "Put it on speaker." Oscar raised an eyebrow but did as I asked. Rebecca's voice filled the barn, high and strained. Mom, please. I know you're there. Oscar, if you're listening, please make her talk to me. I said nothing, continuing to monitor the foal's attempts to stand. Mom, I'm at the hospital, Rebecca continued, and something in her voice made me look up sharply. I'm having complications with the pregnancy. The doctors, they say there might be problems. I need you. Oscar watched my face carefully. He knew me well enough now to recognize the war between maternal instinct and hard-won boundaries. Please, Rebecca whispered and started crying. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm scared and I need my mom. I took the phone from Oscar and turned off the speaker. Where are you? Lenox Hill Hospital. Labor and delivery. I'm 2 hours away, I said. Don't do anything stupid while I'm driving. I hung up and found Oscar watching me with concern. You don't have to go, he said quietly. Yes, I do. I stripped off my barn clothes and reached for the clean shirt I kept in Oscar's truck. But not for the reason she thinks. The drive to Manhattan gave me time to think, to prepare. Rebecca was 28 years old, married to a man who'd left her after discovering her lies, carrying a child whose paternity was questionable. She'd built her life on deception and social media validation, and now it was crumbling around her. I felt no satisfaction in her pain. That surprised me. I'd expected to feel vindicated, to enjoy watching her suffer the consequences of her choices. Instead, I felt nothing but a cool, clinical detachment. The hospital was exactly what I'd expected: sterile, busy, full of people in various states of crisis. I found Rebecca in a private room, looking small and pale against the white sheets. She'd lost weight, I noticed. Her face gaunt in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with stress. Mom, she breathed when she saw me, tears starting immediately. You came? I pulled up a chair beside her bed but didn't sit. What's the medical situation? She blinked, clearly expecting a different kind of conversation. I'm at 32 weeks. They're worried about preeclampsia. My blood pressure is too high and there's protein in my urine. They might have to deliver the baby early. I nodded, processing the information with the clinical part of my brain. Preeclampsia was serious, but manageable with proper medical care. Not life-threatening if caught in time, which it had been. What do the doctors say about treatment? Bed rest, monitoring, possibly medication to lower my blood pressure. If it gets worse, they'll have to do a C-section. She reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. Mom, I'm so sorry about everything. The wedding, the things I said, the money. Stop, I said quietly. She looked at me with confusion, like a child who'd expected punishment but received indifference instead. I didn't come here for apologies, Rebecca. I came because you said you needed medical support, and despite everything, I'm still a doctor. But I am sorry, she insisted. Blake left me. Did you know that? He said he couldn't trust someone who would steal from their own mother. I've lost everything. You stole from your dying father, I corrected. And you chose to announce your theft at your wedding in front of 200 people. Blake didn't leave you because of what I said. He left because of what you did. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? I stood up, finally feeling something crack in my carefully constructed calm. You systematically embezzled money from your father's medical fund while he was dying. You and your brothers conspired to steal from me while I was grieving. That's not a mistake, Rebecca. That's sociopathy. A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by my raised voice. Is everything okay in here? Fine, I said, smoothing my tone back to professional neutrality. I'm Dr. Florence Tremblay. I'm here for a medical consultation regarding my daughter's condition. The nurse nodded and retreated, though I caught her hovering nearby. I want to see your medical records, I told Rebecca. I want to talk to your attending physician. I want to understand exactly what kind of care you're receiving. Why? She whispered. Because despite what you are, that baby doesn't deserve to suffer for your choices. I spent the next hour reviewing Rebecca's chart, consulting with her obstetrician, and ensuring that she was receiving appropriate care. The preeclampsia was mild, caught early, and entirely manageable with proper monitoring. She was in no immediate danger, nor was the baby. Your medical team is competent, I told her when I returned to her room. You'll be fine if you follow their instructions. Will you stay? She asked. And for a moment, She looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. No, the word hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. I don't understand, she said. You're my mother. You're supposed to forgive me. I'm your mother, I agreed. Which means I taught you right from wrong. I gave you every opportunity to be a decent human being. You chose something else. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Mom, wait. Her voice was desperate now, panicked. What about the baby? What about your grandchild? I paused in the doorway without turning around. When that child is born, if you want them to know me, you can call. But understand this, Rebecca. I will not enable your behavior anymore. I will not fund your lifestyle, clean up your messes, or pretend that what you did was forgivable just because we share DNA. But we're family, she whispered. No, I said, finally turning to look at her one last time. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't abandon each other when things get hard. Family doesn't slap each other in public and call it love. I walked out of that hospital room and felt something break free inside my chest. Not my heart, but the chains that had bound me to people who had never deserved my devotion. The drive back to Vermont felt like coming home. 1 year after Rebecca's wedding, I stood in the Vermont courthouse, wearing a simple cream dress and holding Oscar's hand while a justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife. There were no guests, no reception, no social media announcements. Just two people who'd found each other after decades of waiting, choosing love over spectacle, substance over performance. Oscar kissed me when the ceremony ended, and I tasted freedom on his lips. We drove home to the farm, our farm now, officially. The papers signed that morning made me a full partner in both the veterinary practice and the property. The autumn maples blazed red and gold around us, and I thought about cycles, about things dying and being reborn, about how sometimes you have to let the old growth burn away completely before anything new can take root. My phone had been silent for 3 months. No calls from Jacob, whose cryptocurrency ventures had finally collapsed entirely, leaving him bankrupt and facing federal charges for wire fraud. No desperate voicemails from Jonathan, whose financial consulting business had folded after clients discovered his history of embezzling from family members. And no more tearful pleas from Rebecca, who'd given birth to a daughter in February. A daughter whose paternity test had confirmed what everyone suspected: Blake wasn't the father. I'd kept track of their downward spirals through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist sharing updates about the Tremblay family drama. Rebecca had been evicted from her apartment and was living with a rotating cast of friends who grew tired of supporting her quickly. Jacob was working at a big box store, his dreams of tech fortune reduced to scanning barcodes for minimum wage. Jonathan had moved to Florida to escape his reputation, but money had a way of following financial criminals, and his problems had followed him south. They'd each tried different approaches to reach me. Lawyers threatening lawsuits that went nowhere because truth was an absolute defense against defamation. Family friends acting as intermediaries, urging forgiveness and reconciliation that I politely but firmly declined. Even a private investigator who'd shown up at the farm asking questions about my estrangement from my children, until Oscar ran him off with a shotgun and a promise to call the sheriff. But today, on my wedding day, I felt nothing but peace. Oscar and I spent our wedding night delivering twin calves on the Morrison farm, working by lantern light in a barn that smelled of hay and new life. It wasn't romantic in any traditional sense, but it was perfect. Two partners working together toward a common goal, celebrating life instead of performances. No regrets? Oscar asked as we cleaned up afterward, both of us covered in straw and exhausted but satisfied. About marrying you or cutting them out of my life? Either. Both. I considered this, watching the sunrise paint the Vermont hills gold through the barn windows. Charlie used to say that regret was just pride wearing a disguise. You regret things when you can't accept that your choices led to consequences. And my choices led me here, I said simply. To you, to this life, to work that matters. If I'd kept enabling my children, kept letting them steal from me and treat me like a disposable resource, I'd still be trapped in that cycle. They'd still be calling me selfish while picking my pockets. Oscar pulled me into his arms, and I marveled at how right it felt. How completely I'd healed from the woman who'd stood in that Hamptons ballroom a year ago, desperate for scraps of love from people who saw her as prey. Besides, I added, regret implies I had other viable options. What was I supposed to do? Keep funding Rebecca's lifestyle while she called me names? Keep pretending Jonathan's embezzlement was a misunderstanding? Keep making excuses for Jacob while he stole my credit cards? You could have forgiven them. I could have enabled them, I corrected. There's a difference. That afternoon, while Oscar napped in our bedroom, the master bedroom I'd moved into 3 months ago, finally ready to share a bed with someone who saw me as an equal partner rather than a convenient target, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The forensic accountant had finally finished his work. The full extent of my children's theft was laid out in spreadsheets and bank records, $347,000 stolen over 3 years while their father was dying, and I was too grief-stricken to notice the systematic drain on our accounts. But the accountant had also done something else. He traced where the money had gone, mapped out the web of lies and shell companies and fake businesses my children had created to hide their crimes, and he'd provided me with everything I needed to ensure they'd never be able to do this to anyone else. I opened a new email and began typing. To tips@irs.gov. Subject, tax fraud, unreported income. Attached, 127 pages of documentation showing Jacob's unreported cryptocurrency gains, Jonathan's unreported income from his embezzlement operation, and Rebecca's failure to declare the money she'd stolen as taxable income. The IRS took tax evasion very seriously, and my children had been sloppy about covering their tracks. The next email went to the New York State Attorney General's office, reporting Jonathan's financial crimes against elderly clients. My accountant had discovered that I wasn't Jonathan's only victim. He'd been using his legitimate business to prey on widows and retirees for years. The last email went to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, detailing Jacob's cryptocurrency schemes and providing evidence of his use of interstate commerce to commit fraud. I sent all 3 emails and closed the laptop. Oscar found me there an hour later, still sitting with my coffee, watching the sun set over land that belonged to us. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Justice," I said. "And the difference between revenge and consequences." He waited for me to elaborate. "A year ago, I thought about revenge constantly. I wanted them to hurt the way they'd hurt me. I wanted them to lose everything they valued, to feel abandoned and betrayed and helpless. But now I realize that revenge would have required me to stay connected to them, to keep them in my life, so I could watch them suffer. That would have made me just another kind of predator." Oscar nodded, understanding immediately. "So instead, you chose consequences." "I chose to let the world respond to their actions the way the world responds to thieves and liars and fraudsters. I didn't manufacture their punishment. I simply stopped protecting them from it." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I glanced at it and saw Rebecca's words. "I had the baby, a girl. I named her Florence after you. I hope someday you'll want to meet her." I showed the text to Oscar, who read it and shook his head. "Even now, she's trying to manipulate you." "She named her daughter after the woman she robbed," I said, deleting the message without responding. "The audacity is almost impressive. Will you want to meet the baby someday?" It was a fair question, and I considered it honestly. "Maybe. When she's old enough to form her own opinions about right and wrong. When she's old enough to choose her own family based on character instead of genetics. And if she grows up to be like her mother, then she'll learn that actions have consequences, just like everyone else." We sat in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over the farm. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the cattle settling for the night, and closer by, the barn cats were beginning their evening hunt. It was a good life, built on honest work and mutual respect, and the kind of love that didn't demand the sacrifice of one's self-worth. My children would never understand that. They'd see my happiness as evidence of my cruelty, my peace as proof of my selfishness. They'd probably spend years telling anyone who'd listen about their terrible mother who'd abandoned them when they needed her most. Let them. Their version of the truth was just another performance, another attempt to manipulate sympathy from strangers. I knew the real truth. That love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's addiction. That family built on guilt and obligation will always crumble. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people face the consequences of their choices. And I knew something else. Something that would have been impossible to believe a year ago, sitting in that empty house in Westchester. That life could begin again at 53. That love could bloom in the ashes of betrayal. That justice served cold was still justice served. Oscar squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for this man who'd waited 30 years to love me properly. The stars wheeled overhead, and I was finally, completely, free. So, tell me, after hearing all this, what would you have done in my place? Did I go too far? Or was it the only way to truly break free from such deep betrayal? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below.